Good afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I am Renee Stetzer from Reconnect Rochester, and although I get to do the intro today, I did none of the work. Our cycling coordinator, Jesse Piers, is the one who put this all together with Justin Booth, having to regroup after our original in-person planned event for April, so thank you, Jesse. I want to give a shout out to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority and the Department of Health as well for making this training free. We at Reconnect Rochester champion transportation choices that enable a more vibrant and equitable community in the Rochester region. And we believe that everyone, regardless of age, ability, income, or mode of transportation, should be able to get around safely in our community. So the concept of complete streets, streets that are designed to allow all users to get around safely, is woven into the fabric of who we are and what we do at Reconnect Rochester. And Justin will get into this more. There is no one model for all streets. Complete street is one that takes the neighborhood context and uses in mind. So something in a rural area will look very different than something in a village or a business district in a city, but it still has that goal of allowing everyone to safely use that street. And many of our community roads are still designed to get as much vehicle traffic through as fast as possible, often to the detriment of those who live along and use those roads, including drivers. So one of the reasons we wanted to bring together not just planners and transportation engineers for this complete streets training, but community leaders and citizens, is to help us re-envision our streets as a community and how our various municipalities can work together to provide safer, a safer connected network of complete streets, reconnecting Rochester, if you will. So I believe we only have 2 official complete streets policies in our area, and feel free to hop in the chat if I have missed anyone. But the city of Rochester and the village of Pittsburgh are the 2. And we're hoping that this might jumpstart more thinking around the importance of these policies and designing our community streets for people and their quality of life. This pandemic and the recent events have shown us how important public spaces are and how much people want to walk, bike, roll in their communities, be out on their streets. So I am now going to turn it over to our headliner, Justin Booth, the Executive Director of GoBike Buffalo, an organization that we have an aspirational crush on that is striving to help create a more complete, sustainable, healthy transportation network in Buffalo. Many thanks, Justin, for adapting to this new venue. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you for the great introduction, Renee. And many of us are adjusting to our new realities and adjusting to some of the concerns that have been popping up in our communities, and of course, how does transportation fit into all that? So we will, ideally through this workshop, be able to identify that. So this is also our first time doing this workshop virtually, so please bear with us here. So now the goal today is to provide you guys all with a set of tools and strategies for facilitating active transportation and lay the groundwork for complete streets in our communities through collaborative discussion. So provided for you here is our agenda. Typically we would do a walking or bike audit in person, but Jesse collected some information and pictures that we'll do virtually today and have a conversation about that and talk about next steps as we move forward. But the first part of this presentation is to really get everyone on the same page about defining complete streets, developing our toolkits, integrating our transportation systems, and looking at how do we make complete streets happen in our communities. So designing complete streets and active transportation. These are some of the objectives that we're going to discuss today. Some of the basic principles. We're going to illustrate the benefits and discuss what active transportation and complete streets means for each of our communities. We have a couple more people just signing in, excuse me. So I'm going to throw this out there. What is active transportation? Sometimes we call it active mobility. Sometimes it's called alternative transportation. Lots of different terms that are out there. I know that our MPO, our Metropolitan Planning Organization, is really focusing on the term of active mobility. And my slides seem to be stuck, so bear with me. There we go. But the Centers for Disease Control defines it as any self-propelled human-powered mode of transportation, such as walking or cycling. And of course, now we're seeing new forms of transportation, such as electric scooters and other forms of mobility. This training is sponsored by the New York State Department of Health because they recognize that the inability for people to walk and bike, to be active as part of the daily routine, is having a significant impact upon people's health. Whether it's increased obesity rates and of course the associated diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. We do know that across the country and here in New York State as well, that obesity continues to be on the rise. And that when we talk about complete streets, oftentimes the argument about why we can't do it is because of cost. And we focus on the direct cost of building a roadway. But when we look at the indirect costs of how we design our environments and how it's affecting people and people's health, the New York State Comptroller back in 2011 did a report about the direct and indirect costs of overweight and obesity in New York State, and determined that childhood obesity is costing New York State $327 million in direct and indirect medical costs. And when you look at adults, that number jumps to $11.8 billion. And so there's a direct benefit for us to really design our streets for all people. When we take a look at the way people are traveling, we know that commute times are certainly increasing, oftentimes due to congestion. But we know most of our mode share in New York State is done by a car. I know here in the city of Buffalo, there was a survey that was done by the Business Improvement District downtown that determined that 88% of the trips made into downtown Buffalo are done in a single occupancy vehicle. And of course, we know that, trying to accommodate all those cars every day as we continue to grow and our downtown starts to rebound becomes more and more challenging. Competing interest for space and resources, whether it's on the streets or off street for parking, can really have a negative impact on our community. So how do we really begin to shift our mode shares to be more healthy and sustainable? So when we talk about travel demand, right now it's very easy for many of us in our communities to drive. It's the most accessible and convenient way to do it. For those who try to walk and to bike, it's not necessarily the most convenient and accessible way. Whether it's trying to be a vehicular cyclist and take the lane in crowded streets, the potholes, the narrow sidewalks, large crossing distances, and the challenges that we have in terms of maintaining some of our basic infrastructure to make our streets and sidewalks safe for regular travel. And when we look at data across New York State, our bicycle and pedestrian crashes and injuries, fatalities has remained flat over the years. There's been research showing nationally that pedestrian fatalities have reached a 30-year high. And of course, we've seen the number of bike fatalities increase in New York City prior to the pandemic due to many of the crashes and speeding and things happening down in New York City. So there's a constant need for us to really think about how are we designing our streets. Education's important. Enforcement is important. But making sure that our street design is really facilitating safety for our community members and for those traveling, and particularly our vulnerable populations, is what's really going to drive these numbers down. When we look at pedestrian fatalities, we also know that, particularly when we talk about where these crashes are occurring, intersections are always one of the most highest places where they're happening. That's where we have most of our interactions on our streets. Most of the conflicts are occurring. and most of the challenges in terms of safe travel actually happen. So what are complete streets? Smart Growth America defines it as streets that are designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and ability, which is important, all ages and abilities. So whether you have access to a car or not, whether you are young or old, physically impaired or not, we need to make sure our streets are accommodating all people's needs. And complete streets have so many benefits for our communities. We can't just measure it on the throughput of the number of people moving through a certain intersection. We really need to take a look at how our streets are having a positive impact upon the economic vitality of the corridor, personal health, livability, mobility, choices, environment, safety, and equity. All these factors really come into play when we think about how our streets function in our communities. So when we think about how we move people versus vehicles, right now, when most of us think about, particularly those are traffic engineers, one of the main metrics we utilize is vehicular level of service, which is essentially our subjective measure of how much congestion we can tolerate at an intersection during peak travel time. And the goal has always been to have a better level of service, have better throughput of vehicles, to reduce the vehicles idling at the intersection. However, that metric doesn't take into account, it takes into account vehicles and not necessarily people. So that metric will account for a bus carrying 30 to 50 people, the same as a car carrying one person. And so when we think about the spaces that are devoted to vehicle travel, what we need to start thinking about, and what we've seen communities around the country and around the globe thinking about, is how we're maximizing the efficiency of the space on our streets to move more amount of people through our corridors as opposed to just moving more cars. Of course, one of the biggest challenges that we see in all our communities, and a place where we need to put a lot more effort into, is the impacts of transportation and climate change. Transportation accounts for 34% of New York State's emissions, more than residential, commercial, industry, and waste. And when we think about that, transportation and its impact on climate change, it's a three-legged stool. You got to think about the vehicle efficiency, the fuel content, but also vehicle miles traveled. And while we're making progress with electric vehicles, other things in terms of fuel content and fuel efficiency, vehicle miles traveled continues to climb because the way that we've, again, made it more accessible and convenient to drive, of course, drives people towards that mode and reduces demand for that mode, where many of our communities are looking for a much larger impact for so many other options. We also need to consider equity in our planning. I know in many of our communities that there is upwards of a third of the population, third of the households that don't have access to a vehicle. And how are they getting around? Think of a family with a household income of only $30,000 a year. With AAA having the average cost of owning and operating a vehicle close to $9,000 a year. That's a significant portion of household income going towards transportation. And so how do we put money back in people's pockets? How do we make it more affordable for them to, and provide safe access to them to get to jobs in our communities? So we need to consider equity in our planning and making sure that a car is not the only mode which will get us to our destinations. And so when we think about complete streets, it's also what, the placemaking aspects, the opportunities for that, the quality of life, and how are we creating great places where people want to congregate, enjoy, and build that quality of life that so many of us desire in our communities. So a little case study in Hamburg, New York, and this was done early 2000s. It was done back in 2009. This was a state DOT project. Their Main Street, Hamburg is a rural village south of the city of Buffalo. And it was a typical project, Main Street being state DOT jurisdiction, there was essentially going to be a maintenance project and put the corridor back to the way it was, which was, you know, a lane roadway, lots of truck traffic. And the main street in the village had really kind of collapsed. Lots of vacancies, you know, buildings deteriorating. It was challenging to walk across the streets. It was just a very uncomfortable experience. But after a number of years of work and investment, not only through the community and concerned citizens and collaboration with the Department of Transportation, it was really transformed into one of the, I would consider one of the best complete streets here in the West New York region, particularly for a smaller town or village, where this corridor was shrunk from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. They added parking on the street, bicycle lanes. All the intersections now include roundabouts with public art in the center. The impact has been pretty significant, where car crashes on the street fell 66% and injuries dropped by 60%. And on top of that, they've seen a significant increase in occupancy in the buildings, permits being filled, and private investment, because the public infrastructure really supported the economic development that the community wanted to have there. So what do complete streets look like? We're going to look at recognizing informal usage, indicative of complete street interventions, learn how to establish a model hierarchy, and introduce common infrastructure treatments. So whenever we go out and look at a community, and I wish we're all together in person today to do so, you know, we need to recognize patterns. It's so important to observe the environment and how people are interacting with it. You know, are there goat paths? Is there a sidewalk that's adjacent to the street, but there may be a worn dirt path that's set back from the sidewalk just because it's in a splash zone? Are cyclists taking shortcuts around certain locations because while there may be a bike lane, the intersection it crosses may not be the most comfortable or safest to get through? Is there a community interest in a path or street treatment? Has the community been asking for a crosswalk or a pedestrian signal on the location? Many times there needs to be a certain amount of pedestrians to warrant having those in place, but if it's unsafe to encourage people to actually walk there, it's very difficult to justify adding some of those places. And of course, where are the kids going? Where are they hanging out? Where are their destinations? Where's the playground, the school? And how are we supporting safe travel for them? So when we think about complete streets, I like kind of looking at it from, well, I like to say the 3 Ps: projects, policies, and programs. We want to develop, you know, in projects, we want to develop and build an environment that supports all modes. You know, so many projects, whether it's large-scale infrastructure projects or quick build projects, such as painting bump outs and crosswalks with neighborhood groups, that really makes an immediate difference in impact on street safety. You know, what policies are in place to make sure that we institutionalize these processes to support all modes of travel on our streets? Then, of course, it's also important to make sure that we're building awareness through programs, looking at encouraging the correct behaviors on the streets, educating the users on our road on the new treatments that are being put in place, and encouraging the correct behaviors on the streets. So correct design invites the correct use. This is from Clyde, New York, if anyone's been to Wayne County. You know, these streets run parallel to each other. One had an investment from a TAP grant to do some complete streets interventions, and the other one was just repaved. And you can see through these images, you know, the street widths are exactly the same, but some of the simple elements such as street trees, light posts and signage, high visibility crosswalks, ADA ramps, really kind of shrinks the perception and encourages cars to travel at the speed limit. Whereas the image to the right just looks very, very wide, and, you know, looks as wide as you can land an airplane on it, which really encourages vehicles to speed. And so how do we kind of clutter the environment in a way that changes the perception of drivers and encourages the correct use? This image is from Lake George, upwards of upstate New York in above Albany. We did a workshop in Lake George a number of years ago, and this is the roadway once you get off the thruway coming into the village. The speed limit was 50 miles per hour. It was a 4-lane roadway. The sidewalks were immediately adjacent to the road. I was staying right there to your right at the Fort William Hotel. And for dinner, I had to run across the street as carefully as I could to get to the restaurant. The only traffic control device that was there to even alert drivers to pedestrians is that pedestrian crossing sign. There wasn't a crosswalk. There was no efforts to slow vehicle speeds down. And in my opinion, this was a crash waiting to happen. And so how do we really facilitate the right speeds? How do we create safe crossings? These are all key elements when we think about designing our streets appropriately for all users. And of course, we know it's incredibly important to do this because as vehicle speeds increase, if you're hit by a vehicle at 40 miles per hour, your chance of survival is much lower as opposed to at 20 miles per hour. We never have enough enforcement on the roadways to make sure that all drivers are following the speed limit. But design can really do a lot in terms of making sure that if there was a crash to happen, that is not. Here's image from Rockport, New York. Again, a workshop that was done there a number of years ago. It's concerns about the crossing in the middle of town. It was an unsignalized intersection. And this was, again, through a very basic maintenance project, some spot sidewalk improvements, bump outs at the intersection, and some striping, really able to narrow the lanes to facilitate the correct speed, better define the parking and better bicycle facilities, and really make pedestrians a lot safer when trying to cross the street and interact with the businesses on both sides. In the city of Buffalo, and I want to just kind of share the importance of maintenance projects because there's such a tremendous opportunity for us to make complete streets happen for very negligible increase in costs. The picture on the left is the way Delaware Avenue in downtown Buffalo used to look. It was 4 lanes with parking on either side, but it didn't have the vehicle volumes to justify the number of lanes that were there. And so with our complete streets policy in place and bicycle master plan, when the city went through and repaved the street, a very easy reconfiguration just by adding a couple more lines of paint, moved it from a 4-lane roadway to a 3-lane roadway, 1 lane each direction with a center turn lane, and provided enough space for the addition of bicycle lanes as well as high visibility crosswalks and things of that nature. So maintenance projects can have provide a significant opportunity to make some low-cost changes on our streets that are going to have a significant impact on safety. So in many of our communities, we're starting to see the implementation of protected bike lanes. The image I showed you before of Delaware Avenue had the bike lanes on the outside of the parking. And instead of using bicyclists to protect parked cars, many communities are now using parking as a way to protect cyclists. It's a shift in the way that we design our streets and has some additional design considerations. But when we think about, inducing demand for other modes, we know that 1% of the population are what we would consider are strong and fearless cyclists. There are people like myself that are going to ride on any street year round and take the lane, are more vehicular cyclists that are out there. Bike lanes are going to attract about another 7 to 8% of the population by providing that safe designated space. However, if we really want to make a significant difference in terms of changing mode share, improving public health, and some of the other benefits that we talked about complete streets, protected bike lanes have shown to attract upwards of 60 to 70% of our population, making it safe for families, for children, and have really demonstrated an increase of safety of upwards of 90% in the communities that have measured the impacts on these streets. And so, oftentimes, again, it can be very simple with just some paint, some education. You can see the picture to the right also included some planters to make it more attractive. You know, depending on its implementation, there could be some signal timing enhancements that need to be done. But these don't need to be expensive treatments. And this image is actually from the city of Syracuse, which they've implemented a two-way protected cycle track using parking to do it. And they've simply just used some paint and some parking curbs as a way to delineate the space along with some of those plastic delineator posts. And so these don't need to be expensive treatments. Again, it's just a reallocation of the space on the streets to consider how we can better accommodate all modes of travel. And of course, our good old-fashioned bike lanes, 5 feet wide at a minimum. Sometimes we see them being buffered, whether you're buffering the parked cars so cyclists aren't getting doored, or buffering from the vehicle traffic, just giving them a little extra space. Shared routes or shared lane markings. These are best used in what we would call bicycle boulevards or neighborhood greenways. Really best to placement in the roadway where you already have low volume, low speed streets, or it's absolutely necessary to connect a portion of the network where there just isn't the space to do it at that moment. Of course, what's essential is the intersection treatments. I notice it here in Buffalo and many communities that I've been to, that the bike lanes essentially end at the intersection. And of course, the majority of the crashes that we see in our communities are happening at the intersections. And so how are we designing our intersections to not only support safe bicycle travel, but also to provide better access for pedestrians? You can see, put on the pointer, you can see here, with the crosswalk cutting across with the cycle track, so pedestrians have an opportunity to kind of cross the street in 2 phases, crossing the bicycle traffic before then crossing vehicle traffic. You have the pedestrian refuge island being created. All those things make a significant impact in terms of providing safer intersection. We can show another example there. This is an image only in New York, which through a TAP grant a couple years ago, just completed a major reconstruction of their downtown, their village main street, which again really has spurred a significant renaissance in the local businesses that are happening there, that are reclaiming those spaces and in their village. And so again, having the center median, pedestrian refuge island, the warning signs and flashers, all these things do a lot to reduce crossing distances, providing the appropriate traffic controls, and really slowing vehicle speeds down to make it safe for our most vulnerable users to cross the streets. Sometimes we can also use design to facilitate the right behaviors for pedestrians as well. And you'll notice here the crosswalk through this median, how it's curved, because it forces pedestrians to turn when they're crossing the street, forcing them to look to see if there's oncoming traffic coming. And so again, it just reinforces the importance of utilizing design as a key feature for exacting the correct behaviors from users of our roadways. When we look at our sidewalks, it's really important to take a look at the different zones that we have in our sidewalks. This is in an urban commercial district area, or maybe in some of our villages and our main street, making sure that we have, the edge zone, the area adjacent to the curb, so people can get out of there, in and out of their vehicles, sometimes for snow storage and any splash zones. The furnishing zone, so where you may put your bicycle racks. Sometimes there's outdoor seating there as well, or any other of the signage and furniture that you may put in the street. We want to make sure that there is a throughway zone, minimum of 6 feet wide for ADA accessibility, for people to continue to move through that corridor. And then of course the business frontages and the opportunities to really particularly during nice weather, to create that sense of place and community, and giving businesses the opportunity to expand their seating area to help support economic development measures. Very similar in our neighborhoods or more rural areas. Again, utilizing that edge zone and the curb planter zone for street trees, again, snow storage, but having that clear throughway zone so our sidewalks are safe and accessible. And I can't understate the importance of our street trees and the additional benefits that they can provide in our communities. Curb extensions, a key aspect of shortening the crossing distances for pedestrians. It's New York State law that vehicles can't park within 20 feet of the crosswalk, but without curb extensions, we all know that vehicles will park whenever they can find a spot, and that oftentimes reduces the ability for vehicles to see pedestrians at the intersections and making it difficult for people to cross the street. So curb extensions are a great treatment, whether it's at the intersection itself or potentially in mid-block, slowing vehicle speeds down, and creating those sight lines and improved visibility at the intersections themselves. High visibility crosswalks, incredibly important. Making sure that we can, drivers know where pedestrians should be crossing. There's a clear zone for them to do it. Sometimes in communities, they can be enhanced at nighttime with whether it's crossing beacons or some in-pavement lighting as well. But again, high visibility crosswalks, the ladder bar, incredibly important to improve the crossings at our intersections. Bike parking can take many forms, whether it's on street or off street. You can see always in the furnishing zone or sometimes in the curb extension. They could be stylized to represent the community you're in. You can see on the right, on top, the apple that was used, or the stylized racks that we have in Buffalo. At schools, the rule in the past used to be put them off to the back near the dumpster so they aren't seen, which is usually the worst place to put them because that's the easiest location for bicycles then they get stolen. And so we're seeing many schools now put the bike racks up close right to the entrance of the school. This way that there's less of likelihood of any vandalism occurring to the bicycles or thefts occurring. And of course, ADA accessibility, making sure that we're accommodating all users on our streets, people that are mobility impaired, making sure that we have this correct corridor design, grades the slopes, support all people, sidewalk services are appropriate. We have truncated domes at the intersections, people that are visually impaired, with appropriate curb ramps and other pedestrian crossings in place. And of course, never underestimate the opportunity to be creative in our streetscapes and adding public art, creating, doing the placemaking and creating that flair. I think one of the best treatments I've seen or experienced was in a community called Fremont in Seattle, where on their main street in their business corridor, they put in bronze dance steps. So as we were taking a look at these and taking pictures of these great public art pieces, an elderly couple walked up and just started following the dance steps that were put in the middle of the street just for fun, right? So our streets are places to interact, they're places for public art, they're places to build character and community and that quality of life. And so utilize these aspects to your benefit when looking at our streetscapes to make them more comfortable and attractive for people to use. The city in Rochester has done a great job of, doing some really creative public art in our intersections themselves. And I think that's a model that we've seen other communities strive to do as well, utilizing our streets as a public space that is not just for movement of people and goods, but also for creating that sense of place. Environmental considerations, making sure that there's opportunities where it's appropriate to capture our stormwater, whether it's through rain basins between the street and the sidewalk, or other opportunities such as porous asphalt, or using plants to absorb the water as much as possible, so those large rain events, we can prevent the pollution running into our water systems. So there's lots of resources out there. And I would highly encourage all of you to take a look at the National Association for City Traffic Officials. They've developed quite a few design guidelines, and most recently have come up with another guide called Don't Give Up at the Intersection, really looking at bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure at intersections, new treatment protected intersections, both for cyclists and pedestrians, which a couple of communities have been implementing. ASHTO has developed a guide for development of bicycle facilities, protected bike lanes, and of course there's constant work by and studies coming out funded through New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and taking examples that we're seeing across this New York State. And so there's quite a few resources out there, and we can certainly share some of the ones that we use most often here to all of you as follow. I'm missing some of the elements of the slide. So integrated transportation systems. One of the things that I think is important is that sometimes we silo different modes in their own spaces, whether it's vehicles or transit, bicycles, pedestrians. And what we're really trying to take a look at is how do we integrate our systems together? How do we encourage more people to use public transit when we know that the first mile, last mile is probably a critical factor in whether someone's going to take public transit? Is it safe to walk to that bus stop or the transit line? Is there facilities at the end, whether it's bike racks or other elements to support that? Can you take your bicycle on the bus? At the end of your destination, at your place of employment, is there a secure place to lock your bicycle? If you do ride and take public transit, are there programs such as Guaranteed Ride Home to support and provide you that sense of security for using alternative modes? So integrating our transportation systems together and really making sure that we're not siloing the systems apart is really how we're going to begin to truly move mode share. Oh, there we go. So looking to extend the reach of transit, reducing demand for parking, and making sure that we, again, connecting people to their destinations in multiple ways. Secure bike parking, making sure that there's bike racks on all the buses. Some communities are investing in what they call bike stations for long-term parking at facilities. Here in Buffalo, we've even integrated in a parking garage a long-term bike facility that has a vending machine that you can purchase an extra tube along with a fix-it station and other elements that can be utilized to, say, fix a flat tire, or have batteries for for your lights in case they've run out. So again, how are we coordinating and integrating all these pieces together? So I'm going to touch on shared mobility real quickly. Those of you who don't know, the shared use of a vehicle, bicycle, or other low-speed travel mode is an innovative transportation strategy that enables users to have short-term access to motor transportation on an as-needed basis. So many of our communities have invested in car share programs, bike share programs. New legislation has been provided in New York State to take a look at e-bikes and e-scooters and the use of those as well in our community. How are we designing and planning for these new modes of transportation?
Yeah, exactly right.
We also have, Uber and Lyft in our communities. The ability for us to simply pick up our phones and get a ride when we need it, and new technologies that are really connecting the services that we need to make our roads safer. So, I think an important piece to this is, thinking about how these technologies are going to play out in the future, and there's still a number of questions of how that may occur, but this is a continuing conversation that we're seeing, and a lot of thought needs to go into how these will interact with our existing systems and how they're going to improve safety and mobility going forward. So I'm going to stop here before we do the visual street audit and open up for any questions or comments people may have had on this quick rundown on complete streets, the benefits, and some of the elements we may see. Any questions? All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing that one. And Jesse, can I ask for you to, as I'm going to pull up the virtual bike audit or walk audit. Let me share this one. So Jesse, you've compiled these and gave some articulated some opinions on the impacts or challenges of some of these locations. Do you want to introduce this first one here at 672 East Main Street?
Sure. So the default east-west corridor for people getting into and out of downtown is Rochester's Main Street. And gradually we are seeing some improvements, particularly between Culver and Goodman. We're going to see a great cycle track that'll be constructed soon. But this, to me, this little piece right here going towards downtown from the city's east side, to me, it kills the entire corridor. It's a very weak link in that corridor. It's very uncomfortable. And I use it a lot, but I'm never comfortable there. I can only imagine other cyclists having a traumatic experience here and just vowing not to bicycle ever again on Main Street. But as you proceed into downtown, you see that bike lane there that with the dotted green stripes that has you gradually move left just as faster motor vehicles are trying to merge right to get on the inner loop there, 490. So it's a really stressful spot. To make myself less stressed, I tend to take the lane prior to the intersection and proceed straight, which does force drivers to merge over behind me rather than in front of me. But it's just a very weak link. And no matter how bike friendly Main Street becomes outside the space, I worry that this weak link will just deter people from biking down Main Street.
Has anybody else had similar interactions with this intersection or have some suggestions of how to make it better?
Jim Pond here from Monroe County DOT. That's a relatively new installation, as you probably know. So in order to understand that one, we have to back up a block for what's in the preceding block to see where that's coming from out of a bus stop and so forth. So Jesse, this is a difficult spot here to do as a system because if you move the bike lane over prior to that, then you're hung out in the middle one intersection earlier. So I'm not sure how to fix it, and I understand exactly what you're saying, but it is a difficult spot to work with. This was put in on a resurfacing project, so they had to stick with the same curb width, so they couldn't say bump it out and then open up the right turn pocket, which would have been you know, probably could have made that more like what you're looking for.
Jim Jones, can you maybe talk about some ideas?
Thanks, Justin. Let me turn my camera. Yeah, this is actually the recommended treatment where the bicyclist who is continuing straight takes that that space, and this conflict zone is there. It's part of that conflict, but I don't really know a good way around this. I don't know what the right turn volume is. I'm assuming if there's a dedicated right turn lane, then it is warranted. You know, the other thing that's usually neglected is on a resurfacing project is the traffic signals. They don't usually get looked at or adjusted during a mill and pave. And there's a lot of old timing plans that are still in those controller cabinets that are still being used today, but there's a lot more high resolution and adaptive signal timing, whereas this whole intersection could be looked at from a different perspective, as opposed to just trying to minimize queue lengths. So, you know, this is the ultimate crux here. You know, usually you start out with a project, you have a small milling paving budget, and then as you try to provide accommodations to the other users, it just gets more and more complicated. And so we end up cutting our nose off to spite our face. So, you know, the earlier on you can start to think about programming changes and accommodating all the legal users out there, the better, instead of trying to squeeze solutions in here. So, you know, not having the full context here, I don't know, but I agree with Jim Pond and Jesse, you too. This is a stressful situation. So we have a long way to go.
Any other comments on this first walk bike audit piece? All right, I'll move on to the next one. Jesse, this is also your submission.
Yeah, so I bike with my kids all over the city, to Little League baseball fields, to the library, to museums, to parks. And we love bicycling to Rochester Red Wings games. I look forward to having minor league baseball again. But it's always very stressful getting to the baseball park, particularly because of State Street. And I just wanted to draw attention to the tweet there in the middle of the page, which is a very common experience that people have. And the tweet there says, "Oh my God, my daughter just called from an intersection crying. Bike lanes ended. She took the lane, but it was too busy and intimidating to turn left. Cars were honking, people yelling at her. She vows never to ride a bike again. Wife has gone to get her in the van. Hashtag gutted." And that's just a very common experience. I know people that I feel kind of guilty because I encourage them to bicycle. They had a traumatic experience like this, and they're very reluctant to try biking again. And Andrews Street getting to State Street in Rochester is just very uncomfortable. And I would love to see a family-friendly way for people to get to Frontier Field.
Do we have any Rock the Riverway people here? Because that's going to help with this. The route would be along the river, and you'd be able to get right to Platt and take Maury Silver. You would not have to get on either of these streets to get to the same destination.
That would be great.
And I agree that the route you depicted is, that would be hard. I do it. I do all the streets you show. not usually during peak hour. I'm a comfortable bicyclist, very comfortable bicyclist, and I would agree that the route you just sketched would be tough. There are other ways to do that same route, but as a grade, I'm sorry, we do have a gap in that part of the city on the Riverway Trail, which would be helpful when it's filled. Plymouth Avenue has a bike trail on it, but not that far north. It starts at the interloop and goes south, and it doesn't connect well to Andrews. So, yeah, I don't know. In this case, there are other choice routes that would work, but the one you've depicted would be difficult.
Hey, Jesse, this is Bill Collins. I guess if I was doing that route, I would go up St. Paul instead, and then go across the pedestrian bridge, and then straight over to the field from there. Just State Street and Lake Avenue in general is just a horrible place to bike. And I don't know, since it's a state highway, we've had very severe problems getting the state to change it or reduce the width in any way. So I don't know what the solution, if there's any solution to State Street at this point, State Street and Lake Avenue, except to avoid it, which was what I do constantly.
Yeah, it's such a contrast to Andrews Street, which is so bike friendly. If people want to go through downtown or around downtown, I always recommend Andrews Street. It's relatively low traffic. They've got bike lanes. There's some beautiful vistas of the city skyline. And then when Andrews ends and you get to State Street, it's like, oh crap, it's a totally different experience. So yeah, it's a tricky spot.
Yeah, this is Scott McCrae. Justin, are you going to talk a little bit about signage? Because, you know, identifying bike-friendly streets or pathways for people that are not so familiar with the navigation, I think can be really helpful. And it seems like it's an area where we could really benefit a lot for relatively little dollars.
Yeah, that's certainly a good point, Scott. And, you know, getting some, you know, that low-hanging fruit options, signing some of those better routes, encouraging a safer route until we can make some of these longer-term improvements along these corridors. I'm going to switch over to Google Maps real quick. For those of you who aren't familiar with the intersection or the location we're talking about, if we can, beauty of Google Maps. No, so it's certainly, am I in the right location? Yeah. No, so what we can see here, do we know what the traffic volumes are on State Street?
Not
Very
enough.
fast.
Busy.
I mean, it looks like anywhere, I mean, the intersections themselves, we're looking at 4, 5, 6 lanes of traffic roughly that you would need to cross to get across State Street. Obviously some of the, you know, you got a large parking lot at this location at State and Commercial across the street. You know, this really looks like, you know, not knowing the area as well as some of you, a location that's really facilitating vehicle and vehicle speeds. And so this is also often the challenge, right? You know, if the volumes are above, say, 15,000 AADT, you know, that's typically the threshold where state DOT is, and according to the state's complete streets policy, will be able to do a road diet. You know, so it's sometimes is, you know, do we want to continue? Part of it is, are we going to make a conscious decision on some of these corridors to reduce traffic volumes or inhibit traffic volumes and really focus on other modes? Right now, the only state that I am aware of that has really kind of changed their metric is the state of California, where they have moved away from vehicle level of service and through their environmental review process have instituted a VMT reduction mandate as part of their efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they've changed their environmental standards, focusing on VMT as opposed to level of service. And it's really big, talking to some of our peers out in California, they've been beginning to see a significant change in the way that they look at and design their roadways based on how we focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled. Right now, it's really hard to talk about reducing traffic volume on our streets by making it more challenging for people to drive down there. So, and I'm just going to leave this up here for a minute. Jim Jones, I'm going to throw you back up on the spot, and if anybody else has any comments, if moving. Go ahead,
sorry.
Jim.
I'm sorry. The ADT is 21,500 a day there.
21,500.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good chunk of change. That's a lot of people out there. We built our systems over the past 60 years since World War II to support the automobile higher than any other mode. And this is not going to be easy to unravel. We've been feeling now for about a decade or so that there is a need to unravel this. So it's not just transportation, it's land use too. We probably, a lot of people in this room are transportation folk, but we really need to team up with our land use people too, and really step back and think, why are we driving as much as we're driving? And it's just kind of a wicked cycle. So that in itself is really going to be a hard thing to do here. It looks like on State Street here, there's a raised median. Is that true? That center median is a raised median? Perhaps.
In a couple of spots only. There's a couple of spots. The rest of it is not.
Okay. There could be, I don't know what the right of way is, but maybe there's a parking lane. It looks like there's some parking going on there. If this is near the ballpark, that's probable. But something has to give. It just can't be automobile, because pedestrians and bicyclists are legal users of the road, and we can't continue to neglect them the way we have. So transportation design is becoming more compulsory to be inclusive for those legal users. So perhaps a lane could be taken out and put a two-way cycle track in. But the other thing to think about here is project approach. So, like Justin said before, there are silos here. There's a silo. State DOT has their silo. County DOT has their silo. The city of Rochester has their silo. One may deal with sidewalks. One may deal with landscaping, and it's every man for themselves. We really need to take a holistic approach on there. And this is the hardest thing is, doing the engineering on this is probably the easiest part. Walking together hand in hand to get a system that is agreeable is going to be the hard work. And these one-off projects, these projects that pop up either due to an available legislative grant or it's an operation issue, or it's a mill and pave. The street is just potholed, so they focus their money on this block or these two blocks. That project approach, when you're installing bike lanes, you really got to look at the network. So what is this connecting to? To put a bike lane between Factory and Platt is kind of dumb. You really have to connect this to something. And for bicycling to be successful, you have to have a network. So perhaps you have a higher arcing project that actually takes low-hanging fruit and actually builds a network with striping and tactical urbanism approaches, and you actually do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miles and actually build a protected facility, and then come back and rework the sanitary sewer, or rework the drainage, or rework the medians or whatever. So the whole project approach, the way we've been doing it, it's got to go. We got to restart at ground zero. So I can go on and on about that.
Yeah, can I make a couple of quick comments there? First of all, sort of as an example you're talking about, the next project for State Street goes from Broad to Allen, okay? So that south part, which is by Andrews, is up for a project that I believe is in design now, and either it's next year or the year after for construction. I don't want to promise a year. So that part's being looked at. North of the inner loop, though, isn't part of that project, so that waits for another one. The other thing I was going to comment, though, is I think on the good side, I have, although although it's sort of good news, bad news, we're seeing more Band-Aid kind of projects where they just pave and they don't reconstruct. But when we see those, they're longer distances. So we have had some projects recently that have been pretty long, especially in the county. And so there is some of that going on. But whether they're a reconstruction or not, hopefully you're seeing that the new projects, as they are, being built, and when they're done, you go look, oh, wow, they made improvements to the thing. They looked at pedestrians, whether it's East Main Street or Stake. We're trying to get them in there. What's hard is just, if the project only goes from here to here, what do you do with the rest of it? That's where, unless you have a paving project or something, there's just no way to come back and start blacking out striping and changing it all. It makes a big mess. So we're kind of stuck in the cycle you're talking about. I will admit, we're doing the best we can with that cycle.
Yeah, this isn't changing the process isn't easy. It's been a challenge here in Buffalo. It's been a challenge here in other communities. And I'm just going to continuing to have those conversations with multiple entities. And a good example, I think, is the opportunity to get multiple agencies involved to identify additional resources for a project. It's under construction right now with Niagara Street in Buffalo. The conversations around that project started around 2010. It was going to be a simply mill and overlay project, road diet, adding some bike lanes. By working with the community, working with the sewer authority, working with our transit agency, there's been multiple layers of funding that's been able to be added to that project. And so while it's taken longer to get to that full stretch, under construction right now, it's going to be moved to a 3-lane conversion, 1-lane each direction. There's next bus technology with new signal timing, green infrastructure being used, and parking being used to buffer a 2-way cycle track, shortening pedestrian crossing distances. And it wasn't all one pot of funding that came into that. It was funding that came in through multiple agencies to be able to deliver very well thought out project that didn't just consider the entire portal. So recognizing that there's funding is always an issue, looking at some of those opportunities to layer additional cost of funding on top of it, because oftentimes I have found that one of the first things that's cut is some of the better bike, pedestrian, and infrastructure and some of the amenities. But if we can continue to leverage the existing resources, and I'd also encourage to, particularly those of you in the public sector, look to form partnerships and collaborations with the non-profit sector, because we've also seen examples where some developers add money to support infrastructure improvements around some of their new investments. We've seen nonprofits being able to leverage additional resources, like going to some private foundation that supports better access in communities. And so there's lots of different ways we can look at that, but of course it really forces all of us to come to the table to work together. So it's not, and I'm not saying we're doing it well or we're doing it great, but we have a couple shining examples that we can point to. All right, let's go back to the audit page. Let's see. Share screen. All right, Jesse, this was also a Reconnect Rochester submission.
Yeah, so going from one MCC campus to the other, the Rochester Cycling Alliance for over a decade has just been getting a lot of complaints about East Henrietta Road, where the Monroe Community College campus is. It's our metropolitan community's largest learning institution, and it's harrowing to get there on a bike. East Henrietta Road is just very uncomfortable, very wide, lots of traffic. There's a 390 exit ramp and entrance ramp right there. I know cyclists that, you know, go through that intersection all day. They typically have to dress like a radioactive My Little Pony and have to wave their arms and yell and scream as they go through that intersection just to make themselves feel seen and heard. And again, it's our community's main learning campus. It's not that far out of downtown. And I know that people would bike to it, but not on East Henrietta Road. So.
Is there any projects that are coming up for East Henrietta Road? Do we know of? So I'm going to pull up, I'll share screen.
Depends on where you are on East Henrietta, but I think the stretch south of 390 was rebuilt about 8-9 years ago with bike lanes, but it's wide. They're doing work just inside the city limits on East Henrietta Road now between 390 and Westfall to add bike lanes. Yeah, you're down south of here. That's kind of 8-9 years ago. It's probably not due for a project for a while. There are bike lanes there or shoulders. I'm not sure I think they're just provided as shoulders, but it's wide.
Yes, I pulled up just the entrance to the school. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lanes of traffic. I presume the speed limit's at 30 miles per hour, but probably speeds exceed that.
It's 40.
40, it's 40. I think this is, one of the questions that was asked us to cover was the 85th percentile. And I think for those that aren't traffic engineers, that can sometimes be a little bit confusing. So, hey, Jim Jones, I'm going to ask you to maybe give your take on the 85th percentile and how it works or doesn't work.
Yeah, well, the 85th percentile is a statistical threshold set point for traffic speeds on a particular corridor. It's actually a self-fulfilling prophecy is what it is. It's in the current circles, progressive traffic engineers are starting to get away from the 85th percentile because it just says that, okay, I have average running speed here of about 46 miles an hour. It's signed for 40 miles an hour. The 85th percentile is 42 miles per hour. So therefore my street is designed correctly. This goes back to choice and what are we trying to achieve? Are we just trying to achieve throughput? Are we just trying to achieve people to go through as fast as possible and efficiently as possible? Or are we trying to create a space here? Now, this is highly suburbanized here. There's the parking lots are close to the street. All the buildings are far beyond. This is not a land use that is conducive or context sensitive to, high bicycle use or pedestrian use. I mean, this is a lost cause here. I don't know what you can do besides install a protected cycle track or a protected bicycle facility, especially when your volumes and your speeds are that high. The Federal Highway Administration bicycle design guides recommends that you do put protected facilities in there, and the state DOTs are a little bit behind on, or especially New York State is behind on, you know, taking on those design standards. They're still using their highway design manual. They're still using the AASHTO Green Book. You know, they're moving along with a mentality of just moving as many cars as possible. So the context is really important in what we're trying to achieve here. I think I had some other thoughts, but they slipped. This is a tough one. And the other thing is, you know, we're going to be able to do this once probably in our lifetime. So Jim mentioned that East Henrietta was rebuilt about 8 or 9 years ago. So we've missed the boat. This is not going to come back. This paving cycle or this reconstruction cycle is not going to come back. You know, ideally you'd like to do this once and do it right. Even the mindsets back eight or 9 years ago was not progressive or inclusive. They were more towards placating the bicyclist because, you know, that was politically correct. It's really starting to change where negligence is starting to be thrown around in the engineering circles if you are not including ADA users or bicyclists or transit users. You are subjecting yourself to negligent design. You know, when New York State passed its Complete Streets Act in 2012, the tri-state campaign, which is Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, looked at qualified immunity. And qualified immunity basically allows transit agencies, transportation agencies to get away with, you know, doing things on their highways that are supposed to be best practice. So given that, I mean, qualified immunity is becoming important. It's in the discussions now with racism and the social injustice that's going on, but and policing, but transportation agencies have a qualified immunity, so they can, if they are aware that there is an issue with accommodating bicyclists or pedestrians, they can apply best practices to address that. And they have a duty of care that they are obligated to do. So, you know, I know the old mindset is, well, if you change it, you're admitting that you were guilty in the begin with. So they don't want to admit that liability, but you're liable if you don't take on best practices. And that's becoming more and more pronounced in the forefront of case law.
Can we compare this to Buffalo State College and Elmwood in Buffalo? Pat, you were gonna mention.
Yeah, I think actually this is a great opportunity, and we need to do this along all of our campuses that are in the SUNY system. They often have large front lawns that are just grassy areas and could be a great two-way cycle track facility. And Buffalo, New York was fortunate to do this with Buffalo State College along Elmwood Avenue. And so this is the same type of thing that could be done here, even for a short stretch. So I think we need to think bigger than just having an on-street bike lane. We need to think about an off-street facility that will be top-notch. So that's just, I would encourage people to think a little bit bigger on a project like this, especially when there's state facilities that we all pay for.
This is Scott McCrae. Just a quick comment that Jesse kind of nailed it when he talked about the sort of the armored pathway that you need to have to get across that expressway. And this is a really common problem of pinch points where there's an expressway entrance, And I find that they're the most dangerous because the drivers don't have, the last thing they're thinking about are pedestrians and bicyclists kind of popping up when they're trying to enter an expressway. So in that intersection, 390 and East Henrietta was just redone, but it wasn't really, it was window dressing from a cyclist standpoint. It really didn't. It's not at all friendly. And when you have those pinch points, even if you do a great job on the Monroe Community College campus, it's very, very difficult to get across. I live not far from Culver, intersection of Culver and 490, and that's another pinch point. There's a wonderful park right there, and it's very difficult for pedestrians. It's actually dangerous because people are always coming off that expressway. They're looking left, and there's a pedestrian on their right. They don't see them, and you have to be very, very careful. Do you want to talk a little bit about pinch points? It's a major, it would be a major work to somehow separate bicycles. We talked about having a little underpass separated that John Schull proposed for that intersection to get to MCC. But that's a pretty significant infrastructure investment. I'll stop.
Yeah, there's always going to be some challenging locations throughout there. I just want to call attention to, I pulled up Buffalo State College, and this is a project that actually came about a couple of years ago. Right down the street here where the trucks are, this is the entrance to the 198 or the Scojaquada Expressway. Obviously, this is a 4-lane roadway with high traffic volumes. I believe it's pushing 20 to 25 AADT. But the treatment here, of course, being that it is in, we have a college on one side, you have on the other side the Albright Knox Art Gallery, you have Olmsted's Delaware Park to your right-hand side, and then also just down here you have access to the Scojaquada pathway, which runs along the Scojaquada Creek and connects the Shoreline Trail to Delaware Park. This was a major connection, a major connectivity point. Heading further back down south, it also heads into Elmwood Avenue's business district. So, the treatment here was essentially a multi-use pathway, separated from the street. You have two-way bicycle traffic and room for pedestrians there. And when the DOT redid the bridge over the Scojaquada Expressway, which is right up here, it was at first not included, but I think a great improvement that after talking to the Creedoney they did add was the continuation of this pathway across the bridge. So you have a typical sidewalk on the east side of the street, but on the west side of the street, they maintained, and you can see all the cars here, so it's hard to see the cycle track, but you can see here on the bridge, they even use the fence to separate the cycle track in this corridor. So, there's ways to squeeze these in, and again, always looking at what are the current maintenance projects, other infrastructure projects, having that plan in place to kind of dictate and make sure that as these come up, that we are continuing to build that network. Because without this bridge having the cycle track to get across the expressway, you would not be able to access the trail on the other side. It would have been a major, major barrier. So this was a huge step in the right direction. And it could be an example for Monroe Community College, as we saw before, the wide lawn area that they had available.
I want to make sure that we get to Christine Corrado's question. She says, if a total rebuild in our lifetimes is impossible along that stretch, what about adding other traffic calming measures, reducing speed limit, adding street trees, restriping, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and all those things I think are important to add. I think there's lots of opportunities, even if it's, again, you know, short-term, low-cost build projects.
Our joint grade entrance at Thursdays today.
All those pieces can add a significant difference over the long term to make them safer. So I'm going to pull up. Let's see. Do we have Brittany Murphy? I see that you've joined us. I'm going to pull up your submission here for the virtual walk audit. And if you can maybe give us a little description of you know, why you sent this in and your thoughts
A
on
lot
this
of kids. I mean, what, you know, the crap that these kids are propagandized with to get them out to this rubbish is scary.
I'm sorry, can someone put themselves on mute there? Because we can all hear you.
Hi, this is Brittany. This is the intersection of Meigs and Monroe. It's just a couple of blocks from where I live, and there's a sort of de facto bike lane painted on next to the parking lane here, but it doesn't have a stripe separating it from the drive lane. And people take advantage of that to drive right into the bike lane especially when they're waiting for a car to turn left. The picture at the bottom sort of shows that if a car is stopped at that intersection waiting to turn left, people will drive around it to pass on right, which I did some Googling. I think that's a legal traffic maneuver, but it does drive right into the bike lane, which people wouldn't know because
yeah, he has his test, I guess.
So this is the common, I think, a common challenge with lots of our intersections. Can be,
I have everything I need.
Okay.
You know, again, I'm going to bring up Jim Jones. Jim, you want to talk about maybe some intersection treatments that could be done at this location?
Well, yeah, this looks like it could be just maintenance has slipped. I find it hard to believe that the edge line was missed, especially with that bike symbol there. It looks like it was a dedicated bike lane, but maybe it's been about 5 years since the pavement marking was refreshed, so it's faded. You know, due diligence on maintenance is always the redheaded stepchild of keeping our infrastructure up to date. You know, we always forget that doing maintenance is job creation, and the folks who do the maintenance are employed and contributing to our economy. You know, and it's something that we need to think a little bit higher of. But you know, in a tight urban context like this, you know, to have the dedicated bike lane here, I think a bike box could be beneficial, where the left turning bicyclist would be in front of the stop bar in a green box and actually takes the lane if they are taking a left. The signal should be adjusted, detection updated either to cameras. Actually, we're trying to move away from pucks and loops and go to high resolution cameras too that can control the intersection, so that are responsive. But you know, just to having clear identification, signage, and pavement marking can go a long way here.
Yeah, and I would just add, you know, cars often, and I've experienced this in some bike lanes where you don't have vehicles using the parking lane, which you can see here at this location. They will often pass other vehicles and cyclists on the right-hand side, which as a cyclist can be a terrifying experience. And so opportunities an opportunity at the intersection here. Could you do a bump out at the intersection that would eliminate the ability for vehicles to be able to go around to get through that intersection? Would certainly make that a lot safer, and you know, of course, it would create some queuing, particularly if the vehicle in front is looking to make that left-hand turn, but it would certainly make it a lot safer for both pedestrians and cyclists in a situation like this. All right, we'll go on to Robin Wilt from the town of Brighton. Are you available to speak on this location? We have Robin on the call. So Robin stated, walking to work on University Avenue, and there is not only a confusing bike lane configuration at one point, but the sidewalks and the commute home also disappear in one stretch, leaving me unsure where it is safest to walk until they resume, necessitating a busy street crossing. And so we could see the overview of this location. Obviously, I think one of the key aspects here is that you've got the land use, you've got the three intersections where you've got buildings up to the street wall, but also a significant amount of parking on the upper right-hand side of the bottom image. Number of lanes to cross, despite having high visibility crosswalks. And I think something that's important to take a look at is the curb radii. One of the things that I often find in intersections like this and to be challenging is it facilitates cars to take right-hand turns on reds, unless there's a signal in place. So as a pedestrian tries to cross, it makes it even more challenging to get across the street when cars are making that right-hand turn. So again, I'm going to turn this over. Anybody else? Jim Jones, can I ask you to maybe just a couple thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is the traditional approach to an intersection or a project is to widen it, provide exclusive turn lanes, but we're only looking at benefiting the vehicle or the motor, the automobile. So there's a competition here for safe pedestrian access, and there's no accommodation for bicycling here at all. This intersection would need, if we wanted to accommodate bicyclists, a road diet. Does it need 4 lanes with exclusive turn lanes or a high resolution signal? High resolution signals cost about 20 to 25 grand to add to the cabinet with the cameras and the controller and the data links, and they can provide a more optimal performance at the intersection. This is a tough intersection here. But curb extensions, there's not even any parking lane here too. So without looking at the volumes, it seems like the default approach is just to provide exclusive turn lanes to move vehicles through. But again, we need to step back and say, who are we servicing? We need to service everyone. So the project approach would need to change. And, most likely here, because the right-of-way doesn't exist, you're not going to fit anything more between those buildings. You're going to have to concede a lane or two in both directions.
Hey, Robert, I see you there. Do you have any other comments or thoughts on this intersection? Hey, Robin, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm not sure if anybody else can. I don't see you on mute, but give us. Oh, it's okay. We were all having challenges with this. Doing this virtually. I do recognize, I saw at the bottom image that there is a bike lane that's going down there, but again, it was, I didn't notice it to the end. That doesn't really see how any of the locations there necessarily connects to that bike lane as well, nor are any accommodations made to that intersection for any potential cyclists. The sidewalks that do exist look fairly large, but I can imagine not necessarily the most comfortable to walk down, considering there isn't a buffer between the sidewalk and the oncoming traffic. And with the volumes I presume that are there, could often be just not comfortable. So again, it's thinking about when we think about our roadways and how we're accommodating pedestrians and cyclists, it's providing a sidewalk is great, but if it's not comfortable to walk on that sidewalk, we see this many times. We won't see anybody out there actually utilizing it. And so that's something we need to address.
Yeah, it looks like Justin, it looks like there is a two-way center turn lane there. And that's another common legacy approach to providing that, factor of safety or that accommodation for turning vehicles. But there you're sacrificing, 12 feet probably that could be provided to bicycle facilities. There's no sidewalk on the lower left corner there. It's all green lawn there. So there's no sidewalk there, and the sidewalk on the other side of the street looks very narrow, and there's no snow storage. So, this has been widened probably to accommodate that left turn center lane. And those in certain contexts, especially in an urban context, I would hesitate from their use, because they do take away from the bicyclist's opportunity and the pedestrian, and they increase crossing distance and crossing time. So then you got to adjust your signal timing for those additional pedestrian calls.
Robin was also drawing attention to the fact that the bike lanes disappear prior to the intersection, and I know even the League of American Bicyclists up to pretty recently had advised municipalities to make bike lanes end prior to intersections so that cyclists could merge over into regular traffic. Justin, can you talk very briefly about right hooks and left crosses and what's being done around the country to prevent right hooks and left crosses?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And, again, I think the best guidance that I've been seeing is really coming from the National Association of City Traffic Officials. Their guide, Don't Give Up at the Intersection. And I'm in the process of pulling it up right now. I'll share my screen with you all. But again, it really looks at how do we make our intersections safe to reduce those conflicts, which can be so detrimental, and really be the place where we lose our access at the intersections. So I'm just going to stop share on that one. Now here's, of course, this is an example from New York City DOT. And again, I think what's important to note is that this isn't much more than paint. Obviously, the land use and context is much different than the image we just showed. But what you can see is, changing the curb radii, increasing the sight distances. This is the left-hand turn that's being made here. And the breakaway delineator posts really pushes the vehicles away from the intersection and allows both pedestrians and cyclists to easily be seen through there. I really like this image. I think it really kind of indicates kind of what we're talking about here. Not only for, providing two spots for, or providing a pedestrian refuge to cross the bicycle traffic first, and then of course the vehicle lanes, but also how that's having improving the safety for cyclists at this intersection. So this guide does a lot. You can see here the little island that is used to change the radius of the intersection for vehicles. That's really the key component to this. So it's essentially thinking about putting out a bump out, but only doing the small little piece of it as a way to provide the through traffic for all modes. And so they give really some great guidance in terms of the stopping, the standing zone, pedestrian islands, the bikeway, setbacks, crosswalk markings, the motorist waiting zone, which of course is incredibly important. And again, it's all about making sure that we provide those clear sight distances for all users at the intersection. Makes a significant difference. And again, this doesn't need to be all that expensive. It's a lot that we can do. If we have the original curb line, a lot that could be done with paint, either some plastic delineator posts or maybe a small little cement island that can make a significant difference at those intersections. So we'll include this in some of the resources that we send along to everybody. All right, let's go to Patrick. You want to talk about this intersection you shared?
Yeah, so this is South Clinton and Goodman. Everyone's aware of it, probably. It's a busy intersection, a lot of traffic, a lot of streets coming in at odd angles. I live just south of here, and I rarely go up north towards the Park Ave area on a bike because of this intersection. It's just not an easy place to get across. And I would imagine it limits lots of other people in the directions they choose. I know it's something that a lot of people know needs to be improved, but with the traffic volumes and other things, it's tough to do. But it's just something that really would help connect parts of the city back together if it was easier to transverse.
Jim Jones, your take on this intersection. I think I know what you're going to say. But
my first instinct is this is begging for a roundabout here. There's a parking lot in the lower right-hand corner. Looks like there's a building in the center left, or the center, lower center, but a roundabout here could be considered, and it's hard to say how many lanes is this. 4 lanes in each direction plus left turn lanes, so 5 lanes. I don't know what the volumes are, but with roundabouts, I'm sure a lot of you know what their benefits are. They can provide continuous flow at a significantly reduced speed, enhanced safety due to lower velocities, so there's less severe crashes. T-bones, head-ons are essentially eliminated. Throughput, the perception of throughput is always a challenge, but if it's slow and steady, you'd be amazed at the throughput. And if it's AM and PM peak hours, it's probably backed up now. It probably is a really horrible intersection now in the AM and PM. But the rest of the day, the traffic is probably equally demanded. So, a roundabout could be considered here. The skews are a little bit. They could be provided. They could. I think a roundabout could be considered here. Is it, Jim? Do you know if there's a roundabout considered here?
Hi, Jim. I think you mean me. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That's
I've known
okay.
Jim Pond a long time.
That's fine. Here's some thoughts on this one. It has been road dieted a couple of times to get it down. It used to be, once upon a time, 2 through lanes each way. Now it's 1 through lane on Goodman, southbound, 2 northbound, a left turn lane. Clinton has that right turn lane that you see going northwest is now a right turn lane. That used to be a through lane. There used to be 2 through lanes on South Clinton. Now it's 1 through lane and a left turn only lane. So we've shaved down the lanes pretty good. You know, the biggest problem with this intersection is that 5th leg that you see there, Henrietta Street. What we tried to do, roundabout, by the way, it's very tight on land use. There's a gas station, a theater on the south wedge at the bottom of the picture, a building very tight on the north end of the picture, a diner that's full of the cars that you see in the parking lot. That's the only parking that diner has. It's a well-known diner called Highland Park Diner. And then this thing that you can almost see the words on the roof, it's an electric supply company. So it's very tight land use. But what we try to do in Henrietta Street is make it one way away and get rid of one of the signalized legs. And then when that didn't pan out, we tried to make it right turn only so we could run it with a left turn phase and again, eliminate the signal phase. We have not been able to do that. If we could get rid of that one leg and a signal phase, then you free up some signal timings for the other movements. It could, I'm not saying it would, but it could then maybe think about taking some more lanes away. But as long as that's 5-legged intersection with 4 different phases going, the signal timing for each street is, we can't give a ton of green time to any street because it's got to move along. Down in your area, you used to have 3 RTOs crossed each other, 20A, Big Tree Road, something like that. This isn't that bad, but this is a 5-legger. So that's been the biggest problem with it is we have to stop everybody on all the other streets and let that Henrietta Street go. In fairness to that neighborhood, there's very few ways in and out of that neighborhood. I understand they want to keep full access. That's been the proposal over the years, trying to figure out a way to get that to regular intersection instead of 5-lane.
Yeah, obviously, you know, the parking would be a concession. The parking is always in the negotiations. You know, this looks like a fairly dense urban neighborhood, so I don't know what the truck traffic is, but perhaps a mini roundabout could be considered here for certain conditions, and tractor trailers, the occasional tractor trailer can negotiate a mini roundabout, you know, but yeah, this is a fun one here.
I want to remind everybody there's a chat box running and a lot of people are sharing comments there. So be sure to read the chat box as well. Thank you.
So Pat, can any other thoughts on this intersection, the cycling problem or opportunities to maybe improve it? I mean, if you live here, I'm sure you've had some thoughts about things you'd like to see done.
Unfortunately, I don't have very many creative thoughts to solve the solutions. The cycling problem is that it creates a area where at least and I'm a pretty advanced cyclist, commute by bike most days, but I don't like to go through this intersection. I avoid it at all costs. And so that's the cycling problem, is it creates a bottleneck and a block, for me at least. But the solution, I don't see many solutions because it is a very tight land use issue there. My main solution would be to reduce the amount of lanes at that intersection and create a dedicated bike lane that is protected. And I don't know if that would work volume-wise, but that would be my easy solution.
Yeah, you guys gave us some really good, challenging locations to consider during this virtual audit. All right, let's move on. Art Clayman, from Schenectady. You've submitted some spots here. Are you available to speak on them?
Is this by chance an older section? Because we don't have a Schenectady in our area.
This got opened up to some folks outside of the Rochester area, so I believe this is a Schenectady, New York. Yep. Well, we'll take a look at it just for some conversation. But the first photo shows one side of the street where the bike lane ends abruptly in front of a busy corner. Cars here cut over quickly to either make a right turn directly in front of the cyclist or to continue to the next major intersection and make a right turn there. The next two photos show the other side of the street where the lane also ends abruptly at the first intersection it comes to. There's a lot of room on this side of the street. Unfortunately, the city left space along the curb for cars to park, even though I've never actually seen a car park there. And put cyclists directly next to the traffic lane where cars like to go fast. Done right, this could either be a protected bike lane or one where parked cars are next to the travel lane and serve as a buffer for cyclists. That possibility is more problematic now because they just created a bus stop around where the second photo is. So I think a good point that is brought up is parking. We haven't talked a lot about parking, but oftentimes I feel, at least from my experience, whenever we make more room on our streets, whether it's through road diets or not, the number one thing that we typically are being asked for in our communities to add is parking, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, we need to balance different priorities on our streets to ensure that we're still making it safe. And oftentimes parking comes at the expense of safety for pedestrians and cyclists, particularly when it comes to intersections. So one of the projects that Jim and I are working on for our council member and city assembly member is Grant Street here in Buffalo, New York. And it's a tight, narrow street. It's a major bus route with parking on both sides, only one way in each direction. But the street, well, has a number of thriving small businesses, also has quite a bit of newer builds with a lot of off-street parking. And so Jim, do you want to maybe talk about some of our the work that you've done on Grant Street and some of the thoughts about parking and how we're trying to adjust that challenge there?
Right. So Grant Street is made up of 3 or 4 or 5 predominant types of context. So there's a tighter urban context where the buildings are close to the sidewalk, and then there's areas that there's been several demolitions, so those are more wide open, and then there's a section of small single or double family residential lots, and then there's we have a Tops, which is a large grocery store, so it's more of a suburban feel. And then there's the Buffalo State campus on the other side of Elmwood that we looked at before. This is on the west side of the campus. So there's several different contexts, and there's not going to be one solution that fits all contexts. So there's going to be some transitions. And there's going to be some discussions, a lot of discussions about parking. A parking space is usually 8 foot by 20 feet, 160 square feet where you can fit one car, or that same parking space could accommodate 5 or 6 bicyclists parking there. So in certain times, it makes more sense to accommodate bicyclists than it would for a single occupancy vehicle. If parking is always a consideration. Right now, there's parking on both sides. If we were to put parking on one side, that would free up some real estate on the pavement for bicycle lanes and curb extensions. And this is what Justin's showing here is one of those sections that has, you know, the dense context, and it's built up fairly close. And this is probably one of our more popular intersections here, where the building is close, but you know, these signals are legacy signals. They really don't respond. They're fixed time. There's very little detection, if any detection, or if the detection's there, it doesn't work. And there's no pedestrian push buttons. There's no countdown timers. There's very little here. So we're looking at recommending high resolution signals with pedestrian actuation here. But, you know, another recommendation could be lowering the speed and making the shared space a little more supportive. And we're also looking at possibly using those parking spaces for parklets. Parklets are that parking space in the street that's used for the restaurant or for the shop, where it's protected from the traffic flow, but it could be used for as part of the restaurant outdoor venue, outdoor dining or seating. So there's a lot of different techniques that could be used here. But then if you go further north on Grand Street, it's a lot more wide open. It's still 36 feet wide. There's no parking, there's no on-street parking demand, so bike lanes could easily be accommodated there. But there's these areas where you a lot of competition for space. It's going to be a little bit of everything here.
Yeah, I think one of the important things we're doing is doing a parking analysis on the street. How many, right, during peak, you know, times, how many cars are actually parking on the street, say in front of a business, versus how many spaces are adjacent to the street on every cross street that goes to it. There's, you know, for thriving business district, you know, it's very important to, you know, really focus on accommodating the needs of those businesses, while at the same time, you know, there's nothing to say that someone couldn't walk a block to get to the street, as long as you know, there's adequate parking provided around the surrounding areas, as well as there's enough off-street parking in locations. So finding out what the peak parking demand is in that area, and then looking at right-sizing the amount of parking spaces that we have on the street to free up some additional space to still support the businesses and the parking needs that they have, but also at the same time, you know, how do we reallocate some of the spaces to make the street safer and for other known users.
Right. In this image, you also see a bus shelter on the left corner there. And there's very little space between the bus shelter and the curb for a sidewalk. So the clear zone for a sidewalk is non-existent in the winter for sure. Yeah, there's a shelter for buses for transit riders, which is good, but at the expense of a pedestrian. So there's this competition for space here that is a struggle. I've seen a few people comment about using lots for municipal parking. I think that's an excellent idea. There are some lots that have been raised, or now the city went through and has demolished a delinquent property, and now it's just kind of a missing tooth in the dental work of the street. That could be an opportunity for a strategically located municipal lot, so that parking, on-street parking, could be displaced in the municipal spot, but folks would have to walk to get to where they're going. Everyone is a pedestrian, right? So we get out of our car, we have to walk to where we're going. The crux of the matter is how far we're willing to walk. So everybody has to walk, but how far are we willing to walk? So that's part of the dialogue here. And Grant Street is the one of the highest bus route corridors in the city of Buffalo. So there's a transit dependent neighborhood. There's a lot of new Americans in this neighborhood that are pedestrian. They do not have access to a vehicle. So this street is incredibly important and very eclectic and bohemian. It's a very cool street.
Hey, could you put some pedestrian indications in there, by the way?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing now.
Great, thanks, Jim. All right, let's go back to our next walk audit. Jim, we have lots of Jims today. Jim Chodak, Director of Transportation and Parking at the University of Rochester. Are you here on the call and talk about intersections around the medical campus?
Jim had to jump off. This is Andrea Walton, also from the university. I think where he was going with this, these are both intersections that come from our staff parking lots along Kendrick Road into the medical center. Both intersections have different issues. The one at Kendrick at Crittenden, that seems to be a slower intersection for vehicles, as there's a median that goes through on Kendrick and it slows vehicles down. But there's so many, the volume of staff members that cross there to get to the medical center will do just about anything. They don't wait for lights, they just walk. There's been a lot of accidents at that intersection. And then the other one, the one at Lattimore and Kendrick, is a different issue. It's the next intersection up, and vehicles speed up because they're going to turn onto 390. And there's lots of near misses with pedestrians there, as there's a crosswalk right there.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up the intersection at Crittenden. All right, Jim Jones, you're up.
Well, the first thing, I see that perhaps pedestrian refuge islands could be introduced here. Is that the driveway back into the parking lot for staff? That's humongous.
Correct. Yep.
It's humongous. So that's a long way for a pedestrian to walk. So, obviously narrowing that would be a priority. And like the bullet nose on that median there, that could actually be extended into the crosswalk to provide pedestrian refuge. The turn lanes again, those are usually introduced as a matter of convenience to the vehicle, but at the detriment of the pedestrian. So, this is a sense of who wins. Is the car going to win or is the pedestrian going to win? And this looks like the staff parking lot is to the campus, and so the pedestrians are there all year round. Congestion isn't always a bad word. Congestion actually makes people think twice, saying this street is horrible, I'm not going to drive this way, I'm going to ride my bike. So maybe it changes people's attitude. If you keep coddling them, they're going to just keep driving. So you gotta you got to start thinking, you know, about everyone. You just can't think about the vehicle. And the wider it is, the faster they go. So, you know, get rid of the turn lanes and put curb extensions in and extend the medians for pedestrian refuge. You know, this is a really wide intersection here. This could also be a roundabout here as well, too. A mini roundabout. Mini roundabouts are something to consider as well. You know, the roundabouts that are going in nowadays tend to be over-engineered, over-designed, way too big. They really can be much more petite. And it depends on the complexion of your traffic makeup, you know. So those are some thoughts. This here look like the bike lane ends and then you go into a shared situation. Goes from a buffered bike lane to a shared space. So.
Yeah, and this is just another example where, you know, we do it, you know, through the corridor. There's great bike facilities, buffered. You've got the green paint to really show the conflict zone and really call it out. You know, an excellent treatment along Crittenden that, you know, as we get to the intersection, you just create a mixing zone where you're going to have the most conflicts for cyclists, for pedestrians and whatnot. You know, and this happens all too often. So again, don't give up at the intersection. The intersections are key in terms of making sure that they're safe. You know, once you cross the street here, it looks like there's not only a sidewalk, but kind of like a wide, am I fair to say that's like a wide sidewalk or even multi-use pathway adjacent to the sidewalk. So you almost have already your separated cycle track in this location. So lots of good features already exist, but it's really the intersection where, you know, some, you know, with just some paint, maybe some bollards, maybe the long-term extending the, as Jim mentioned, extending the medians to create those refuge islands is going to go a long way to improve the safety here. Because right now this intersection is designed for primarily one focus, and that's to move cars through it quickly. And so this is where we need to go back and start thinking about how do we strike those balances about making our intersections safer.
Right. Extending the medians also lowers the left turn velocity of the vehicle, or the vehicle turning left. So if you extend that median out, it forces that left turning vehicle to slow down. I noticed a comment about pedestrian accommodations in a roundabout. So if this were a single lane roundabout, the pedestrian is usually, the crosswalk is usually one car length outside of the inscribed circle. So there could be one car that is queued up waiting to go into the roundabout, and that car acts as a blocker, a buffer. So the pedestrian is only crossing one lane at a time, low velocity cars, and they have to be mindful of one direction at a time. Right now, this pedestrian who crosses here has to be mindful of the right turning car, vehicles who could go through, left turning cars, and vehicles oncoming. So 4 potential vehicle movements that the pedestrian has to be wary of, at least. But in a roundabout, the crossing, you're crossing one lane at a time in one direction. So it's incredibly safer for a pedestrian than this type of intersection. And it's low speed too, so they can accept gaps. And a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of people won't cross at a crosswalk. They'll cross behind a stopped car because they feel safer, because that car is acting as a blocker, and they feel, I don't know what it is, but traffic engineering is the most sociological engineering division out there. Electrical engineers don't have to worry about the sociology and psychology of their users like the traffic engineer does. It's incredible. But you know, the other thing about crosswalks is, you know, this goes way back into traffic engineering school where, you know, the cardinal rule of traffic engineering was to never violate driver expectancy. So, you know, as you're going back in your days of college and you're thinking about your levels of service and your 85th percentile speed, you know, the cardinal rule of traffic engineering was never violate driver expectancies. So crosswalks are designed to accommodate that driver expectancy. The crosswalk is there at an expected location. So the crosswalk is really designed for the vehicle more so than the pedestrian. The pedestrian will cross at the shortest distance or where they feel the safest. You know, that's human nature. The physics of a vehicle is a lot different than the physics of a pedestrian. So crosswalks are designed for vehicles. They are where the car is expecting them to be. They're not necessarily where it's best for a pedestrian, but you know, that's the way they've evolved. But be mindful of that driver expectancy. And we've grown that expectancy to be very what's the word, entitled. So the motorist is very entitled because we give that factor of safety, we give that forgiving design, and it just makes it worse. It doesn't make it safer, it makes it worse. So that mindset is really starting to change in the ITE world and APA and public works. It's starting to change the conversation. And that's why we're here today.
Thanks, Jim. All right, we're going to go to, we got a couple more of these left, and then we can go and talk about the next steps. Let's see here. Emily Royce, are you still on the call? Planner with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council. We've got 2 locations. All right, well, we can do a quick, the one image is challenging because there's a Wegmans on the left and all these on the right. Off Chile Avenue, there are some sidewalks in the area, but the quantity of traffic that comes through those intersections is immense. And many of the drivers are not used to pedestrians. I've actually talked to the Wegmans complex, and they have had plans to connect the plaza to a new build residential area to the left of Wegmans, but that is stalled. I've seen pedestrians walk down the middle of the side entrance, drive to the plaza. There's no pedestrian access to Paul Road. My point is this doesn't help the lower income residents that may access the Aldi, Big Lots, Dollar Tree, and Wegmans Target Plaza. So let's see if I can get that a little bit larger here. It looks like those red marks are there. So yeah, number of challenges in this location as well. And, you know, I think it's important to, again, we're looking at, you know, the context and land use. A lot of the submissions have been primarily more of suburban nature, auto-dominated infrastructure uses, very large setbacks from the road with parking, you know, dominating you know, a lot of these corridors, and, you know, many pedestrian accommodations are some of the last aspects that have been kind of squeezed in, certainly not making this attractive and safe place to walk. And again, when we talked earlier, Jim made the point of, talking to our those in transportation engineers or public works departments. Also, we need to work in tandem with the planners that are developing our land use codes, our zoning codes, our comprehensive plans, and looking at these spaces and the opportunities in these spaces to really, how do we change the way that we've built the land use patterns that we built here, which is dominated by moving vehicle traffic, to really kind of being more of a pedestrian and pedestrian scale and pedestrian oriented for people. So I think the land use challenges with this location and some of the other ones is what's driving the safety concerns. And of course, while you can see, as I mentioned earlier, there's sidewalks and crosswalks that are provided, is not the priority movement or vehicle that's provided to access these locations. So I don't know, Jim Jones, do you have any other additional thoughts?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with zoning. So this looks like your traditional Euclidean zoning dilemma here, where residential is to the upper right, and then the predominance of the picture is commercial. So our municipalities are charged with zoning laws and zoning codes, and a lot of municipalities have Euclidean type zoning, where it's that hierarchical type of use where you live over here and you have to get in your car and you have to drive over there to go get a head of lettuce or go to work. The folks up in the upper right hand picture can't walk to Wegmans. They have to get in their car to walk. If you threw a stone, that's probably an eighth of a mile, but they have to get in their car and drive over there because there's no infrastructure. And the parking lots are grossly oversized because our zoning law requires parking minimums. Parking minimums should be eliminated from your zoning laws because they're like putting extra notches on your belt. You just get bigger and bigger and bigger instead of dieting and watching your weight. So and the sidewalks, I don't see any sidewalks on the main road. I see one sidewalk on one of the side roads. So if there are sidewalks, they're like directly adjacent to the travel lane. So there's no offset. It's not a comfortable walk. So if you're building things that are not safe and comfortable, they're not going to get used. So, hopefully this type of construction and this approach to development is getting challenged, and it's going by the wayside, especially with remote workforces and the food, people being more mindful of local food sourcing. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to put a bodega on the corner of your residential street, so you could have a grocery store or a coffee shop or a bakery or a butcher. So you could get locally sourced food. So it's hard to think of this just in transportation terms, because the land use here dictates everything.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. We're gonna keep moving. Kieran Playford, are you available to talk about your submission? This looks very similar to the one that Pat shared earlier.
Kieran had to step off for another call.
Okay. Does anybody want to talk about this intersection or their experience with this this location?
Well, you did mention one thing. It's another five-legged intersection. For you planners out there, it's not a good idea to design them. At least here, there's only one lane on all approaches, so that part is good. There's no road diet opportunities when you just have one lane on each approach. But it's a five-legger, and they're all signalized in the same light, so you have to go one road at a time like the other one. I'm not sure, though, what the specific issue is on this one. Do you know which crosswalk or issue it was, please?
Don't have any details other than the images on this one. So, I mean, I think from the street view, it's quite clear that there's, you know, a lack of any paint on the street to delineate spaces for crosswalks and whatnot, bike facilities and the like. But I don't know, again, without experiencing it, you know, it doesn't, there seems to be missing a double yellow even down the street.
Yeah, I don't know how current that photo is versus what's really out there today, but it has limited crosswalks because part of it is considered the middle of the intersection. So I think that leg you see there, you don't cross because you're going into an interior part of the five-legged. If I don't see walk, don't walk signals either. So it's one of those, you cross on three legs, but not right there because people are moving. Sometimes it's the inside of the intersection. It may be bike lanes because there's no bike lanes there. Not sure. It's not the best intersection.
Yeah, no, it looks a little bit challenging, but okay.
Hey, Justin, it's Renee Stetzer. Can you, Jesse's computer rebooted and he needs to get back in to help moderate. Can you let him back in?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Yep, done. Let's move on to do we have Bill Collins here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Bill, we're on your submission. It's the 103 Court Street. Do you want to talk about your submission?
Sure.
Issues?
Sure. So Rochester has some great trails, multi-use trails. It's a little bumpy and maybe a little narrow at points, but we do have some nice trails. This is the entrance to one of them, the Genesee River Trail, going from downtown, running south along the river. My issue with this is that currently this has been blocked off because the city is constructing a skate park near the entrance to the trail. And while the city has put up detour signs for this trail to the south of the blockage, detouring trail traffic around it, there's no detour marked if you're trying to enter the trail from the north. So anyone trying to enter the trail from the north, first of all, can't see any signage before they actually get to the closure, because the trail detour sign is hidden behind the other signs. And then once you actually see the sign, it just says trail and detour. So it doesn't appear as though the trail is actually closed at all. So this is a signage problem, but we actually, it's especially irritating for users for this trail because this was just reopened. It was closed for a long time because the building, you see the corner of there, had blocked, the construction of that had blocked this off for many months. And it was reopened for I think just like 3 weeks or so before the construction of the skate park closed it down again.
So this is, I think, just important when we think about complete streets, really thinking about how they function, everything from design and construction to maintenance and detour routes, and how are we prioritizing the users of our roadways. I have never seen a construction project that didn't provide a detour sign en route for a roadway project. Make sure that vehicles still had access to get around the construction site. However, I find it to be very rare that we are mandating, even if it's on the books, that we're mandating that there be a clear, safe, and effective signage and detour routes for pedestrians and cyclists during construction projects. So this is certainly a case where go back to the city charter, the books, and see what's on, on there in terms of what they are required to provide. This could certainly just be a very easy fix where it's a call from the city to their contractor to remind them of the rules that are required to make sure that appropriate safety and detour signage is provided for access to the trail. This is something that happens on a regular basis, and sometimes a simple phone call reminder to the appropriate entity is can be incredible, can be effective. But again, this goes back to our priorities.
Yeah, I really just kind of wanted to bring the detour issue to everyone's attention because, as you mentioned, it also has to do with pedestrians. I know that I had an interest, I didn't submit it, but I have an interesting photo of my street that I live on where there was construction on the street and there were signs on both sidewalks saying sidewalk closed, use other side. But this happens on many downtown streets too, where a sidewalk is closed off for a construction project, and they really there's signage directing the pedestrians to cross the street and use a sidewalk on the other side of the street. Well, pedestrians just won't do that. They will walk along the construction site on the side where they want to walk. In other cities like New York City, they will put a detour into the roadway if necessary, or put protection around the sidewalk to shelter the pedestrians. And I think that practice needs to become more widespread.
Mm-hmm. And there also should be, it's something that we've gotten, I would say, a little bit better at here in the city of Buffalo, at least for pedestrians. But it's something that there needs to be a constant reminder of our municipality to just make sure. And it's often, maybe it's usually in the bid package for the construction company to make sure it's provided. But unless there's, regular checkup on that construction company, it's not necessarily always followed. So unfortunately, it's not necessarily always a proactive process, but more of a reactive. And this, having good advocates in our communities are essential to make sure that these rules are being followed.
I think, Justin, one thing to be mindful of for designers especially is the PROWAG, the Pedestrian Right-of-Way Accessibility Design Guidelines. And basically, you have to provide for pedestrian access as an accessibility requirement, and it's law. So it's just the guidelines have not been finalized yet. They're still in the 2011 version. However, we go back to the best practices and trying to do the most we can do for a project. But we are, as designers, obligated to provide that continuous passage, and the pedestrian access route has to be maintained. So that's just being familiar with the requirements, and to truncate a pedestrian facility is actually the Department of Justice. They could be grieved on this. So that's just something to be mindful of. We had a project in Buffalo here last year where we had a major trail closed because a private company was doing a replacement of their water intake, and they just closed the trail without a detour. So that caused a big stir, and now there's an informal coalition of operators, trail operators who at least have like a phone tree. You know, back in the old days when you had a phone tree, at least you have an open conversation. So this is, you know, just changing the way we approach projects and just talking to each other. So you just can't close a trail off. It's just, you just can't do that nowadays.
Thanks, Jim. Our last submission from Don Burns, Reconnect Rochester volunteer. Is Don still on the call?
I'm still here. And
all right, Don, you want to talk about this spot?
Thanks for selecting. It's a little bit in the suburbs. This is Marsh Road at over the canal in Bushnell's Basin. And this bridge was recently refurbished by the state. One of the main problems with it has always been you don't have visibility to the other end of the bridge to see if a car is waiting to take a turn. The courtesy is you wait for the bridge to clear. It's a one-lane bridge, and then you progress yourself. In the refurbishment, they did say that they've improved the visibility to the other end because it is kind of a blind wait. If you're a car and left-hand drive, you can see on the bottom picture, you have a little bit better view, but the layout of this whole thing is sort of like a big S, with the bridge being the center part of the S. And so it's really challenging to see if someone's entered or not. On a bike, you can see the coming south in this lane. You can't see the other end at all. It's a metal mesh bridge for the cars, which is treacherous, I find, on a bicycle. And the called pathway on the left-hand side takes you out of visibility for both ends. And it's one of those, I won't call it textured sheet steel, but it has the little knurls on it, so it's fairly easy to walk on, but really slippery to ride a bike on. So I use this a lot. This goes over the canal. It's canal access underneath, probably the most popular canal access between Pittsford and Fairport. And the only thing I can see on this is either change the material on that path from steel to something else more suitable for bikes, or just get off your bike and walk across. But it still puts you in the lane of oncoming traffic. Open for ideas.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with this. I used to go to Burgundy Basin there for conferences all the time. This is one of those situations where my old mentor used to say it's so dangerous that it's safe. But I get where you're coming from on the surface material for you know, riding your bike across there. That steel is slippery, and the grading is unnerving if you're trying to ride a bicycle over that. But you know, I don't know what the accident history is here. If there is fender benders, I don't know if someone can speak to that. Maybe it is one of those situations where it is so dangerous it's safe.
This is Mike Dozer. I'm the director of planning for the town of Parenton. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we've attempted to appeal to New York State, I believe, 5 or 6 before it was redone, before the decision to refurbish it, if you will. And we weren't successful, but we were trying to advocate for 2-lane access and also more space for pedestrians or active transportation. I agree. We recognize that it's a very dangerous situation, but I agree with James that it's so dangerous that it might be safe because of just the way it's designed. And we're often told, and I've seen it myself, that cars will actually have face-offs in the middle of the bridge, inevitably, where someone has to, you know, back up and allow the other car to go through. So it's not a great situation, but it's been there for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think that since it's recently been redone, the only, I'll say, point of emphasis for me today would be, is there an alternative texturing material for that steel plate on the left?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I imagine when it is slippery when it gets wet. I've actually not experienced that, but yeah, I can imagine that's probably not very good.
It's even more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists, it seems like. I mean, they're very close to the cars. They have to, if you're walking in one direction, you have to cross over to get to the steel plating to even walk, you know, to get out of the way of the car.
Yep.
And this is
Yeah,
a bridge over
it's so narrow, I think cars drive over the steel plate, not recognizing that was the design or that was the intent or the design intent, I guess, of that steel plate. But cars just feel closed in and they drive over the steel plate anyway.
Slow is good in this
Yeah.
in this case. If you do have mixed use like this, so you know, slowing the cars is the objective. You know, in order to accommodate all the users, you'd have to replace the bridge. You know, that'd be new foundation. That'd be a pretty significant project. I don't know what the daily traffic is on this. 9 or 10,000 maybe at most. I don't know.
I would guess that's kind of high, 9 to 10.
Okay.
It's just leading to a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
On the north part. But I think for the neighbors, I think making it 2 lanes and providing a little bit more accessibility to all you know, modes of transportation, they feared that it would, you know, it would increase traffic too. That's another concern.
Has a parallel bridge for pedestrian and bicyclists ever been considered? A parallel structure?
We've talked in the past. We've talked about some possibility of maybe hanging some type of parallel structure off of the side, and I think structurally that kind of got shot down. That was before my time with the town. But there have been ideas, and there still continues to be ideas to connect Marsh Road in a better manner to Bushnell's Basin, or vice versa to the Burgundy Basin. It just has not been something that's come to fruition yet, but it's still an item of interest, I guess I would say.
Would it be possible to put bollards between the mesh and the steel plating to provide some protection for pedestrians or cyclists?
Vertical delineators, that's a great idea.
Perhaps, yeah. I don't know how much it's narrow, but maybe that could be a possibility.
Yeah, it would give some sense of buffering.
What about a warning light that a pedestrian or cyclist would activate before they cross?
Yeah, there was some talk about that, but that unfortunately I don't have all the details. But I don't think that. I think there was a reason why that couldn't be done. I guess I'll
there's no sidewalks here, so the pedestrians in the street.
Right.
I would assume so. They're walking against traffic.
Yeah, it's a very odd configuration.
Yeah.
For any type of active transportation leading up to the bridge. There really isn't any space. You're walking in the roadway.
Yeah.
For the most part, particularly if you have 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, so I don't know what, like I said, the accident history is here. You know, there's a perception that it could be better, but sometimes, it's, I hate to say it, but let sleeping dogs lie.
I put the ADT on the chat box, 3,500 vehicles a day.
Oh, that's pretty negligible. That's pretty small.
Okay.
If you want to replace that bridge, you're probably talking, 10, 15 million. And is it worth it for 3,500 cars?
No, but your answer is in car perspective. There's
yeah, right.
That's really true. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So that's the focus, is not the limited number of cars, but how do you make it safer for alternative?
Yeah.
And I think bollards could be a help.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'll make a
That's
note
great,
of that. Let me,
great idea.
yeah.
Yeah, those are about $36 a piece. Just bolt them right on. Yep.
So
Okay.
change the surface, look at bollards, and maybe some kind of warning signal.
Mm-hmm.
How about
All right.
carpet? How about carpeting? No, I'm kidding.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we've had a really great conversation about some of these, submissions for the virtual walk audit. It's actually, for the first time doing it, I think it went better than anticipated, at least from my end. So thank you, everyone, for your input and your feedback and for your submissions. We're just going to a couple more slides to close us out here and talk about a couple next steps. So just a reminder, complete streets are for everybody. Business districts, cities, small towns and villages, whether you're 8 years old or 80, whether you ride or bike or you jog, we know that everyone walks, and it's really about making sure that we are creating equity and on our streets and helping build that quality of life that so many of us desire in our neighborhoods. So we went through a lot of tools today and ideas and design guides that could help facilitate better infrastructure treatments to support safer travel for pedestrians and cyclists. Obviously, this was a very 40,000-foot overview look at some of these different ideas and treatments. And there's a lot more resources that we'll provide you in follow-up and design guidelines that can certainly support and build upon the conversations that we've been having today. I think it's important to remember to make sure we're not operating in our silos, whether we're thinking about how our streets function and the different users, but also to make sure we're making those connections between the modes and connections to the different professions that are working to make our streets and communities safe, whether it's our traffic engineers, our planners, our community groups, and the like. So we talk about complete streets, and from a safety perspective, we're always looking at the hierarchy of users on our streets and making sure that all improvements are accommodating, walking and biking, transit, other rideshare options, carpooling, and at the very end, of course, vehicle travel. Implementation is not easy, and you need lots of players at the table. And it's also important when we think about the public engagement process, how we are doing it in a way that is meaningful to the public, and so the public feels like their voices are being heard. Too often we will show up and we'll do our 3 public meetings and introduce the project, talk about some of the ideas that have been progressed, and then come back with the community with the final plan. And we've been finding more and more that process doesn't necessarily work. We need to do a better job of meeting people where they're at, making sure that the issues that they bring up are addressed and identified in the plan, and working together to identify the resources and develop the policies to support implementation of these projects, whether that be short-term or long-term. But for any of us to continue to get traction, of course, it's important for us to evaluate and track our successes and set goals to achieve them. From crashes and fatalities to costs, economic activity, and healthcare. Too often we focused on, again, vehicle throughput, but our streets have so many other components to them and can provide so many opportunities. I have found it to be incredibly important for us to track our successes. It lets the community know and our opposition know the successes and how we've actually changed the way our streets function. It's also shown our elected leadership how people have perceived these new changes, but also the benefits that they've provided them. And so we need to make sure that we are collecting this data, sharing this data, and talking about how these projects can have more benefits to our communities than just moving cars. So with that, you know, our presentation and is at the end, and we'll turn it back all to you and just kind of get a sense of, you know, what will you take back to your community? What are some of the things you learned and some of the next steps you feel like you're going to take based on what we heard today? Maybe I'll turn this over to our friends at Reconnect Rochester and you know, do you have any thoughts or feedback on some next steps on your guys' side since you've hosted the workshop today?
Jesse, you want to take it, or you want me to take it? I don't think Jesse's there.
Oh, go ahead, Renee. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, you did all the work, so I don't want to, you know, steal your thunder. We are constantly, as I mentioned in the intro, talking about complete streets, and we really appreciate actually I was just thinking about how much more comprehensive the conversation was because we were able to cover so many different locations doing this via Zoom. So that was one upside to the other downsides of not being able to meet in person. But we were able to have a pretty good interactive conversation, more so than if we were at one location or moving from place to place. So we really appreciate everyone's patience, and I really valued having the DOT on here as well, and some of the engineers from the towns participate, because you know, the common thing is getting everyone to work together, and there's no one silver bullet. We need to work zoning with engineering, and there's so many different aspects to this, and our organization, Reconnect Rochester, represents one part of it. We're a community partner and an advocacy group, but I don't know how to close this out because I wasn't expecting to, other than to say thank you.
No, thanks for having us. I mean, some others. I mean, thoughts in terms of maybe improving your process, engaging people, you know, utilizing your complete streets policy. Any other thoughts, comments, next steps that you can take? Jim, looks like you're on mute.
Oh.
You are correct.
Oh,
Go
that's
ahead,
Jim,
James.
sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, I thought Justin wanted me to espouse some wisdom or something.
No,
so,
no, he was lip reading me, not saying anything, yet my lips are moving. Thank you. Sorry. Out of courtesy, I've been muting this as much as I can. There's a contractor working at my house today, so there would have been a lot of banging otherwise. Anyway, Monroe County, one of the things we've done, we've cataloged by location all the active transportation project recommendations for every town, all the ones that are done by GTC and others. We sort it into every location. Whenever we do a project, one of the first things we do is we pull up the list, we pull up the reports. What did that recommend for this location? And we do our best to implement whatever we can. There's a lot going on that's subtle. An example, Edgewood Avenue is going to be paved next year. Yay, for those who ride that thing is really bumpy, I understand. And when we do that, I was looking at this lane widths, the shoulder widths, trying to get the lanes narrower, the shoulders wider, create at least 4-foot shoulders wherever we can where they're lacking. So subtle things like that where the shoulder just gets a little wider, but there we are. We can't always do everything on every project, but we're certainly aware of what we might be able to do, what has been recommended, and we'll continue to do that with each project. Okay, so that's our commitment to screen them all and look at that and make sure, if nothing else, we don't build something without ignorantly realizing, oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to do this on that project. We forgot. We don't want to do that.
So Jim, since I got you on the spot here, I know I'm working with our public works department for years, and I recognize the challenges that they face, kind of getting scrutiny from both sides, right? From the public and from the politicians to kind of make sure that, you know, to get the project done and get it done timely and balancing all the different interests. You know, we've often tried to find ways that we can work together and help them address some challenges. So is there any challenges that you guys face that maybe some of the people here, whether it's the advocates of Reconnect Rochester or planners and whatnot, could help you with?
Well, So sometimes there's one of the better things is an understanding that there are ideas that come out. I could give you an example where I think it was J Street in the city, and we're like, you know what? That doesn't have bike lanes, and it's wide enough for bike lanes, but not parking. Or you could have parking, but not bike lanes. We've gotten this discussion with the city about, well, should we put bike lanes in? But if we do, the parking goes away. And they're like, well, no, we have impacts from the parking going away. So sometimes there is a trade-off between users, and the thought might be, well, if you're accommodating parking and a travel lane, then you've completely forgotten about the pedestrian and the bicyclist, and you're totally car-centric. That is a thought you can have, but do understand that if you take away parking from a resident that doesn't have a driveway, they have nowhere to put a car. That's quite an impact on them. If you have a business which relies on on-street parking to stay in business, and you take the parking away from them, they may close. So we kind of have to. There's extra factors in there, and we have to balance the whole thing. That's why sometimes you'll see a bike lane that doesn't continue all the way through, or an incomplete facility because the project stopped there. When that happens, we're trying to finish the system off. We just have to remember there are other constraints we're under besides just the bike and pedestrian. But just because we don't proceed with it doesn't mean we didn't give it good consideration. So I just want to mention some understanding that there are trade-offs, and we talk about Good and Clinton Henrietta, and as I point on the chat box to others, the ability for the local residents to get in and out of their neighborhood came into play there is a factor that people who aren't from the area would say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Well, 490 cut that neighborhood in half. They have very few ways in and out of the neighborhood, so they wanted to stay part of the five-legged intersection. So I just want to say that there's a lot at play here. I don't want to be sounding too defensive, but just kind of understand we can't always do all the ideas we have in mind, okay? So.
Hey, Justin, I wanted to bring up one topic that we haven't talked about very much, and that's maintenance in complete streets. And this extends over a number of different things, right? So we recently found out that when the street surveys for paving in our area are done, they don't include the area of the shoulder or bike lane in the quality of pavement. And as a result, the area of the shoulder or bike lane that's used by pedestrians and cyclists are a lot of times in much rougher shapes than the rest of the road. But that quality is not taken into consideration when it comes into repaving decisions. Also, street sweeping. A lot of times the shoulder or the bike lanes have a lot of glass or other debris in them. If it's a bike lane or a shoulder that gets a lot of use, it seems like that should get extra attention from the municipality for street sweeping because it's used quite a bit, but the debris tends to build up because the cars don't push it out of the way. Also, sewers can get blocked up, and if you ride in the rain, you know that ponding can be a serious safety issue. If not to your clothes, then to your person, if you have to go around it or if there's a pothole underneath it. So, sewers getting blocked up and causing ponding in the bike lanes or the shoulders is a serious problem. And then obviously we all live in Western New York. So, plowing in the winter of shoulders and bike lanes, if we want active transportation to happen all year round, is a big issue. So I wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Maintenance is often a topic that's overlooked. It's not as attractive as doing a ribbon cutting, but it's something that I think as members in the community we need to consistently stay on top of and continue to bring to the forefront, because we can't expect maintenance to happen every 15 years with a capital project. So
very good points, Bill. Very good points.
I'd just like to add one other comment. I'd be remiss from an e-bike perspective to the planners and designers in the meeting. As you may or may not be aware, the state has negotiated effectively with New York City to allow e-bikes in New York City. with the condition that you cannot ride them on streets that are posted more than 30 miles an hour. Then they left it open to the rest of the state for local jurisdictions to legislate as they wish. So it creates the perverse situation that in the suburbs or main streets around the Rochester area, you can ride a bicycle, but you can't ride an e-bike if the street is posted 35 or above. So if you're in the opportunity to help steer some legislation, that would be beneficial to have e-bikes treated the same as bicycles on the local roadways. Second to that, from a long-term planning, these are the fastest growing bicycle category and growing significantly this year, particularly as people are looking to move off of public transit and getting into an e-bike for personal transportation and commuting. What that means is bikes are typically going to run about 20 miles an hour. You can get other class 3 e-bikes that will have a governor at 28 miles an hour. So what that means is car drivers will not be expecting the speed of an approaching bicycle. And if we're designing intersections and we're designing for bicycles, we should also keep in mind that some of these bicycles will be traveling faster than what the average driver is expecting. And so having that visibility, having the length of time to negotiate are all important things to take into effect for the future.
Yeah, really good points, Don. Thank you for bringing those up. Any other feedback, comments, closing statements?
I just want to say thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This exceeded my expectations. We really had no idea how the virtual audits would go and all that, but I learned a lot. I hope you did too. You know, Reconnect Rochester would love to do continuing programming like this. We love elevating this conversation in the Rochester area community in a variety of ways. So if you want to support us, we would definitely appreciate that support. I can put in the chat link here to support Reconnect Rochester, because this is hopefully the beginning of something great. You know, Rochester has been making great strides and it's gradually working its way outward. And we're very excited about that. So thank you again.
And I would just add, let's keep up the good competition between the city of Buffalo and the city of Rochester. It's always helpful to keep on pointing out the great work that each community is doing as a way to pressure, you know, the political leaders and whatnot to keep it on. So it's been exciting to see the work that you guys have done in Rochester, and you know, there's plenty of ways that you know, we're looking to model after some of the work that you guys are doing. So keep up.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. And yeah, we kept this right on time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Justin, would you mind staying on for a second?
Sure. Hey, Cindy, why don't we just give me a phone call afterwards since it's being recorded?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.